everyone. Welcome to the Trauma-Informed Church Kid podcast. Today and every day, we are reconstructing religion for the hurting with theology that doesn't hurt. In today's episode, we are going to return to our walkthrough of Exodus and Leviticus, and also, as it turns out, Numbers. We will pick up where we left off at the end of Exodus 15, where the mixed multitude had just walked through the waters of wrath, the ones that swallowed up those who were unfaithful, namely the Egyptians, those who would not listen to the plagues, and who somehow still thought the Pharaoh was God. And also, of course, Pharaoh himself, the would-be God and demonic oppressor of the people of God. Those waters of wrath purified and saved all who were faithful, any who were marked by the blood of the Passover lamb, all who were the seed of Abraham according to the flesh, and also those who were the seed of Abraham by faithfulness, regardless of descent. In a word, those who belong to Yahweh, he who causes to be a people out of nothing, the one who took on an empire and won. And to be clear, this is a theme that Adonai makes sure the Israelites understand. They did not win by their own power. They won by the mighty arm of Adonai, who is a man of war, who has no equal among the gods, who has purchased these people, not with a transaction to pay off the evil one, but with his chesed, the love that never stops loving. And his stated goal in that salvation is to bring them to his own house to dwell with him. Quote, "You have led in your steadfast love the people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them by your strength to your holy abode. You will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established." End quote. I don't think it's saying too much to say that this is the central theme of the entire Bible. At this season of Advent, we celebrate Emmanuel, God with us. And the reason why we celebrate that is because Adonai's fundamental desire is to live with and among humanity. We see that in Eden, when humanity and Adonai are in peace and harmony. But of course, in the first fall, humanity rejects Adonai's wisdom. They ate from the tree of knowing before they were ready. And Adonai makes them mortal as a severe mercy, to give them bodies that could change and mutate, either for good, for repentance and restoration, or for evil, for corruption and depravity. And of course, that causes a separation between Adonai and his children, because, as he notes, the thoughts and intentions of their heart are evil. And for him, in his purity, to remain in their midst would be to cause their destruction. We saw that in the waters of purification in the second fall, where Adonai is grieved to his heart at the effects of the impurity of the people upon his creation. And so he makes a covenant with all flesh, never again to cause their destruction. But that covenant requires that his spirit step back from these people. But in that withdrawal, he does not abandon them. He assigns sons of God, or Elohim, to shepherd them, to teach them his ways, to bring them back to his abode. Instead, they try to get to his abode by their own power, and not for his name, but for their own name and glory, falling into idolatry in the third fall. And not just worship of other gods, but oppression, slavery, death, and blood exacted from other humans. And because all the people together has great capacity, either for good or for evil, and since they have determined to use that for evil, Adonai resorts to scattering the nations. However, even here, he does not abandon them. He selects one man, Abraham, to be the father of faithfulness, to make a new nation out of all the nations, one nation for his own possession. And the journeys of that family bring them to Egypt, where rather than moving on to the promised land that Adonai had offered them, they settle down and try to make Eden there in the land of Egypt. This led to them becoming strangers in a strange land, enslaved and oppressed. And here again, Adonai does not abandon them. He steps in and effects their redemption and rescue because of his chesed, his loyal love, his faithfulness, or his tender mercies for his entire family, which is really all humanity, expressed through his love for his firstborn son, Israel. His chesed is the love that never stops loving. No matter how faithless and futile we might prove to be, he will bring us through the waters and the wilderness. And the end goal of that is to bring us home. And that's why the things that we're talking about in our walk through the scriptures is more than just a story that happened long ago. This story echoes in our lives today, especially with those of us who feel like we are wandering in the wilderness, like we are stumbling through deconstruction and church hurt, asking where Adonai is and why he let this happen, grieving the death or the loss of what we used to have before. Let's try to keep that immediate context of everyday life in mind as we re-engage with the walkthrough of Israel in the wilderness. The very first thing we note is that Adonai does not take them the easy or straight or quick path to the promised land. Quote, "When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, 'Lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt.' But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Sea of Reeds." End quote. Adonai knows that these people are fearful and weak. They just spent several hundred years in slavery. As we discussed in a past How I've Hurt episode about what trauma is, this causes generational trauma, where the effects linger throughout the generations. Adonai's firstborn son is dealing with what happened to him and the world that he was born into. And that's one of the reasons why I call this a trauma-informed church kid podcast. I read through the Bible with this trauma-informed lens because Adonai is a trauma-informed God. He works with us as he finds us, and he pushes us to leave our identity as slaves behind, while nevertheless recognizing the complex trauma that comes from having been slaves. And as a result, he is merciful and gracious to our failings. And that is something we will see an awful lot of in our episode today. The other thing we notice about the wilderness is that Adonai is using the wilderness to teach them trust in Adonai as a conqueror and provider. Now, you might be inclined to ask, wouldn't observing the plagues have been enough? Wouldn't the Sea of Reeds parting have been enough? Wouldn't this pillar of cloud that leads them by day and a pillar of fire by night be enough? Well, clearly not, because 3 days after the Sea of Reeds, we encounter the first of 3 grumblings that occur on the way to Mount Sinai, the waters of Marah. Quote, "And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, 'What shall we drink?' And he cried to Adonai, and Adonai showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet." End quote. The Hebrew word for grumbled there is loon. And the image we're supposed to have in our minds, based off of the etymology of that word, is to stay the night at a lodging place, to abide or remain or dwell. Adonai is trying to teach the Israelite people and the whole mixed multitude assembly to remain or abide or dwell within him. However, they loon. They want to abide or remain or dwell in their own power. And later on, we'll see in their own desires. And so the way that he teaches them to abide or remain or dwell within him is he tells Moses to take a log and to throw it into the bitter water. Now, there's a few interesting things about this that I want to point out. First of which is that in solving this grumbling problem, Adonai does not make something brand new. That's a bit of a change from the next 2 times that we see the Israelite assembly grumbling. In this case, Adonai transforms or transfigures what is already there into something that has been renewed and made alive. And the method he uses to do that is through a log, or in Hebrew, eitz, which means very broadly tree, wood, stick, staff, etc. This is a very broad reference to trees that are used just simply for a purpose. For example, in the book of Esther, we see that same word used to describe Haman's gallows. A tree that was supposed to hang Mordecai the righteous instead became the means of hanging the evil one and condemning him. Now, those of you who have read the Bible might hear some interesting echoes in that narrative. And yes, it is true. When we as Christians read the Old Testament, there is a bit of a temptation to see Christ in every stick of wood, in every eitz. Now, that's not entirely ridiculous because in the Septuagint translation of this passage, the Greek word they use to translate that is xulon. That exact same word is used to describe Jesus' death being hung on a tree in Acts. Also in Galatians 3:13 in describing the Deuteronomic curse. Also in 1 Peter 2:24 when it says he bore our sins in his body on the xulon or hates. So it's not crazy to see Christ and his cross in this moment at the waters of Marah. And that is something that several church fathers saw as well. For example, we have Tertullian in the early 3rd century. Quote, "Again, water is restored from its defect to its native grace of sweetness by the tree of Moses. That tree was Christ, restoring of himself the veins of what had been envenomed and bitter nature into the all-salutary waters of baptism." End quote. Or Ambrose of Milan in the late 4th century. Quote, "Marah was a fountain of most bitter water. Moses cast wood into it, and it became sweet. For water without the preaching of the cross of the Lord is of no avail for future salvation. But after it has been consecrated by the mystery of the saving cross, it is made suitable for the use of the spiritual laver in the cup of salvation. As then Moses, that is, the prophet, cast wood into that fountain, so too the priest utters over the font the proclamation of the Lord's cross, and the water is made sweet for the purpose of grace." End quote. We see a very similar connection in the letter of St. Jerome to Oceanus. All of these are an example of what we know as typology. Typology has often been seen by skeptical scholars or people who are reading the Bible without the awareness of the context in which it was written and received. They usually tend to see typology as being a sort of ad hoc way of shoehorning Christ into the Old Testament. But actually, this is what types actually are. In typology, we have a single thing, which is the substance or the substantive reality. In this case, Christ himself, which casts a backward shadow. Just like all shadows, it looks different, but also the same. It can be distorted or pulled out of shape. But if we look close enough, we can see the pattern that reflects the archetype. Now, I bring this up not to try to defend these particular readings, just pointing out that in reading Exodus as typological, I am following a long tradition of legitimate early Christian interpretive practices. So, let me try a little bit of my own, a sort of typology of trauma, if you will. In trauma, we trudge and grind our way through the wilderness of deconstruction, and we finally come to a place that seems like it could refresh our thirst for God. However, it turns out the water is bitter. The only thing that will purify or sanctify it is the cross of Christ. So we have two choices. We can either brave the wilderness and go somewhere else looking for true living water, or we can sweeten the bitter waters with the tree of life. Both are hard choices. Both will cost us a lot because the cross means suffering. It means enduring mocking and ridicule, bearing the sins of others, and ultimately resulting in the death of something that feels vital. But that death always means the death of something that needed to die, so that the new resurrected life can be reborn. We see that in the case of baptism, where the waters of death and the waters of life come together, where ordinary, even ugly things become sacred by being infused and transfigured by the cross. This kind of perspective on trauma and a trauma-informed reading of the scriptures is what I hope for you all to find for yourself if you are wandering in the wilderness like Israel. After sweetening the water with the cross, the text says this, quote, "There Adonai made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, If you will diligently listen to the voice of Adonai your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am Adonai your healer." End quote. Now, that word testing can be a bit activating for many people. It makes us ask questions like, is God just setting the people up? Does he not know what they will do? But there are other ways to look at this. For example, other translations say that Adonai proved to them. And I think that is the best sense that we have for understanding testing. Sort of like in everyday English when we say to test the waters. Kind of like you're dipping your toe in just to see what's already there. Or something like a chemical reagent that is used to test for the presence of other substances. It uncovers what is already within the mixture. And that is why testing is important here, because it is related to Adonai as healer, as the text says. In this process where they grumble, he is uncovering for them the diseases that they already have. Now, they can uncover their disease in two ways. This chemical reagent testing process, where they only get blessing, or him handing them over to their diseases to run their full course, which could be called either wrath or curse. And both will be painful, and both will be a mercy. That's why he tells them, keep my commandments, not because I said so, but because these commandments that he is giving them bring life. That is why the best way for us to look at the wilderness is as a teaching tool. This is the chance of the Israelites to have their circumcised hearts and diseased flesh uncovered as a severe mercy out of his tender mercies. But notice, his response to their grumbling is not wrath. His response is grace. We've seen how at Marah they grumble and he gives them water. This is our chance as well. When we go off into the wilderness, when we take what is not the short or the easy or the direct way to the promised land, we might feel like we are being led by a cloudy and vague sense of God's presence. We know that Egypt that we left behind is bad, but we have no idea where we're going. And along the way, we will encounter hardship and struggle and re-traumatizing. And so when we do, we grumble against Adonai. His response is not wrath toward us. His response is to send us someone like Moses, to throw the cross into the bitter waters of church hurt, to make them sweet for us to drink of them again. And that same pattern of grace and mercy in response to grumbling is something we continue to see throughout the other two examples in our text today. Quote, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of Adonai in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. End quote. You'll notice the framing of this. You have brought us out into the wilderness to kill us. What short memories they have. They have forgotten the protection of Goshen and the plagues. They have forgotten the parting of the Sea of Reeds. They have forgotten the waters of Marah. And of course, before we stand in judgment of them, how often do we do this? We immediately forget the good and gracious things which Adonai has done in the midst of the immediate crisis that we see before us. But again, as before, the response of Adonai is not anger or wrath. Quote, and Adonai said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am Adonai your God. End quote. Adonai's response to their grumbling is to give them daily bread. That is something you might have heard of called manna, a kind of flaky white bread stuff with a sweet taste. Something that is miraculously provided for by Adonai for their nourishment. And it increases on the sixth day so they don't have to gather it on the Sabbath. This is not something that they can hoard or keep for themselves because it goes bad if they'll let it sit. But again, not on Sabbath days. So this is clearly something miraculous, as is the appearance of enough quail to feed them each night. This is something we really need to keep in mind. Because yes, going into the wilderness is scary. To find our own way will result in us being even more frightened, like we saw in why God didn't take them the way of the Philistines. To rely on our own cleverness or our own beliefs to spiritually feed ourselves will result in our efforts turning rotten. Here again, the point of the wilderness is to rely on the Father, because he is good and loves mankind. Even when they grumble against him, he still gives good gifts. That is, yet again, something we see in the third and final example of grumbling on the way to Sinai, the waters at Horeb. Quote, but the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, why did you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst. So Moses cried to the Lord, what shall I do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me. And Adonai said to Moses, pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel. and because they tested Adonai by saying, "Is Adonai among us or not?" End quote. Notice here that they test Adonai. He does not get angry and smite them for their lack of faith. In fact, as we read later on in the prophets, he continues to invite his people to test him. And remember what we said earlier about testing. It is about proving or revealing the character and quality of a thing or a person. So, in this case, the family of Abraham want to see who this God of theirs is, so they grumble against him, and he shows them mercy and grace. That proves and reveals who Adonai is to them. That's why the wilderness is a teaching tool. But I also want to point out something very interesting in that narrative. You may have caught it, but I'm going to go back and highlight it. This is Exodus 17:6. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. Adonai says that he will stand before Moses on the rock. The image is of a visual representation of Yahweh, who stands on the rock before all the people. Moses then strikes the rock, and water comes out for the people to drink. Throughout the Hebrew Bible, we see this motif of living water, which is described as moving or flowing water, which Jesus uses all the time in describing himself. Whether it's the Samaritan woman at the well in John 4, or when he is celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem in John 7, the feast which is a remembrance of their journey through the wilderness, where they build and dwell in temporary shelters, as a reminder of Adonai's protection and provision. Now, something you may or may not know about the journey of the people through the wilderness is that the angel of the Lord, or the visible, manifested Yahweh, the second person of the Trinity, follows the people throughout their wilderness journey. And we see that same visible representation of Yahweh, the angel of the Lord, here in Massah and Meribah. We also see a redo of the same event in Numbers 20, where the same rock is struck and is called the same thing, Meribah. This time, however, Moses was told to speak to the rock, and because he failed to do that and instead struck the rock twice, the end result was Moses was denied entry into the Promised Land. Now, that might seem very harsh to many of us, but I do think it's really important that we not forget that event in Numbers 20 happens after countless experiences of Adonai's provision and trust. It also happens as a recapitulation of this one we just read at Horeb. We should also remember that this rock is Christ, like Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10. Quote, "For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ." End quote. This is the principle which the scriptures lay out for us. When we are being led into the wilderness, Christ, the rock of living water, will follow us. He will provide for our survival and sustenance, not as we wish or desire, but as he will, because his way is better. However, he will always solicit our cooperation and action, and ultimately require our obedience. He endures our mistakes and our weaknesses for a very, very long time, and he allows himself to be struck by us in our weakness. But when we lash out after much grace, anger will follow. That is another possible response to grumbling, the anger of Adonai, like we see in Numbers 11. Quote, "And the people complained in the hearing of Adonai about their misfortunes. And when Adonai heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of Adonai burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to Adonai, and the fire died down." End quote. There are two equal and opposite errors we fall into when reading the Old Testament. One is to read it and say, well, God gets angry and has wrath at every sin. The other is to read it and say, well, God never gets angry or never has wrath. Both are distortions of the biblical text. We've been looking at the three narratives of grumbling in Exodus before Sinai. We've also been taking a brief glance at the 7 narratives of grumbling in Numbers after Sinai. And it is only in the ones after Sinai the ones in Numbers where we find the anger, wrath, and judgment. In all of the Exodus narratives, Adonai is long-suffering and slow to anger. The before and after component about Sinai is also significant. The people now have the presence of God dwelling in their midst. That is a great blessing, but it comes with a great burden, a higher standard, and a more severe judgment. Because Adonai has covenanted with Israel in a marriage ceremony. And, of course, in every healthy marriage, there's plenty of grace and lots of long-suffering. But when that runs out, there is justified anger and real consequences. We will unpack this some more when we discuss the character of Adonai revealed at Sinai. But for now, hear this. Being in the wilderness is not necessarily a punishment. It can feel like it. The grumbling we have is natural and very human. Being in the wilderness is a wandering. It is not straight. It is not easy. It is full of hardship. But it is not the same as being lost. Adonai has not abandoned you. The rock of living water is following you in the wilderness. He is providing your daily bread that you need and the meat that you want. And the purpose of the wilderness is to teach reliance on Adonai, to remind of his love for you, to learn what his voice sounds like away from the noise and clamor of Egypt, so that you can hear and obey, so that you can find your way to the promised land. And that promised land is life with him, where he abides in your midst, comes to dwell in your heart, so that even when you wander, you will never feel lost again.
Why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5?
Okay. Ready? God leads his family into the wilderness to teach them about who he is. He wants them to learn to trust him so that he can live with them in the life he has promised. His heart is that they will stop seeing themselves as slaves and start seeing themselves as sons and daughters. So my challenge for you today is this. As you wander in the wilderness, try to look for the lessons you can learn. Remember what Adonai has already done for you. Maybe he has saved you from the slavery of addiction in the past. Maybe he has guided generations of your family to this place of privilege and blessing. Maybe he has just defeated an enemy on your behalf. But also be on the lookout for what he is doing for you right now. See if he is leading you to water. Notice his presence with you, even if it is only walking behind you. And listen to the voices of the prophets whom you can trust in your life. And finally, think forward to what he has promised to do for you in the future, even when you don't see that life on the horizon, even when enemies surround and attack you like we see the Amalekites doing in Exodus 17. Just like in that narrative, we need to seek help to hold up our arms when we are weary. It's okay that you're weak, because God is strongest when we are weakest. The goal of the wilderness is to teach, not to punish. Adonai can handle your grumbling and weakness. Now, of course, we should not take advantage of his mercy and grace. Like Paul says in Romans 2, quote, "Or do you presume on the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience, not knowing that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance?" End quote. Know that he is not automatically angry at you because of your grumbling. Like with Israel, he is a good father longing to give good gifts, who wants to live with you, to bring you into the promised land. So I encourage you, be humble, patient, and open-minded. Be ready to learn. Not learn what trauma taught you, but learn what the Father is teaching you. To turn you from a victim into a conqueror. To turn you from a slave into a royal heir. Just because you are in the wilderness, you are not lost. Just because you are wandering, you are not lost. Just because you are grumbling, you are not lost. Like Jesus says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst, for they will be filled," just like Israel, with living water, daily bread, and the body of Christ. And that's where I'll leave you today. On YouTube and X, you can find me at Church Kid Pod, and on Facebook, you can join the discussion in our discussion group, Trauma-Informed Church Kids. If you find this content either enjoyable or important, please hit the like button and/or subscribe on whatever platform you listen to. Of course, ratings, reviews, and sharing with others is the best way to increase visibility and ensure that more people hear or see this content. If you have questions or want to engage in dialogue, leave a comment on that platform. Alternatively, you can leave a voice message on SpeakPipe, and I will add it to the Q&R episodes at the end of the season. Finally, just one last word to everyone. I don't know your story, but I know the one who is walking with you in your story. I know that he loves you. He made you for a purpose, and that his plan for you is always better. If you have been hurt by the church, I am sorry for the ways in which we have borne the name in vain. That is our responsibility to repair and repent. I hope that this podcast starts you on your own journey to find resurrection on the other side of deconstruction. My prayer for you is the words of St. Paul to the Ephesians. I ask God that you may know the love of Christ, which is more than we can ever know. I ask that you may be filled with everything that God has. See you next time.